So we did real GDP, we did nominal GDP, we did the price level. And I guess one of the big takeaways I want you to have from that is remembering the business cycle. So the business cycle was what generally people refer to with the ups and downs of the economy. So we've got real GDP. What's so real about real GDP? Your discussion question? What's so real about real GDP? What's that? The R, yes, that's part of it. What's so real about real GDP? So GDP is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within the nation's boundaries over the course of the year. And then we developed real GDP. And so I want to make sure you guys have in your brain where that real, what it means. Hunter?
Isn't that where you also count like or producing stuff offshore and stuff like that, but profit comes from there included in the GDP?
In the GDP, we are going to include the Toyotas made in California. So it's within the nation's boundaries. So that's not what's separating out the real part. So we developed nominal GDP and real GDP, and I want to know what's so real about real GDP.
It's based off the base year.
Okay, good. It's based off the base year. What did that relate to? Now you're on the right track there. What was the base year thing all about? You don't have to tell me perfectly what's going on, but what were we doing? What made real GDP real? It gets rid of the price stuff, right? The price effect. So real GDP is the dollar value, or GDP in general, is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within the nation's boundaries over the course of the year for all millions of goods. Haircuts, lawyer services, dental services, all the stuff that we make is all right there in that little formula. And the problem is what makes us happy is stuff, not the price of the stuff, but the stuff itself. The more stuff we have, in theory, there's good stuff and bad stuff, but the more stuff we have is positively correlated with some other good stuff that we like to have in society, like access to clean drinking water and infant mortality rates going up and all that sort of stuff. But we want to see Q going up. That's what's so real about real GDP, is that this is really Q of the economy. All the quantities of stuff are captured in real GDP. The price effect has been filtered out by that trick we used with the base year. We held prices constant, essentially, and looked at the variation of Q over time. So as the economy goes through these ups and downs over time, we're measuring the Q each time. And so when the economy enters recession, because we just passed through a peak, quantity of stuff is falling. So that makes sense. We don't have as much stuff as we used to. The population probably hasn't shrunk, short of a big natural disaster that wiped out half the population. So we have less stuff per person. That's a real decrease in economic well-being, right? Because if the population stays constant, but yet we have less things, less hamburgers, less pizzas, less beers, less everything, then that's less stuff per person on average. All right, so that's real prosperity when we think about measuring the Q. And we say that the economy is going through expansion after we've gotten through a trough when the level of stuff is climbing. Now, this last section was on unemployment. And one of the takeaways I want you to for sure have in your mind is the correlation. What is the correlation of unemployment and real GDP, the Q? How are those two things correlated? So if real GDP is going up, what's happening to unemployment? It's going down, right? So that's the correlation. Is that a negative or positive correlation between those two variables? One goes up, the other goes down, one goes down, the other goes up. Is that a positive correlation or a negative correlation between those two variables? So let's go through the other one. if something goes up and the other goes up, or something goes down and the other goes down, is that a positive or negative? That's a positive relationship. So if real GDP goes up and unemployment goes down, those two variables are negatively correlated with each other, right? Unemployment's getting bigger. Now, I could have flipped the switch on you and said, well, what about employment? What about the employment rate? What did we learn about the unemployment rate and the employment rate? How are those two things related together? If you know that the unemployment rate is 7%, the employment rate is 93%, right? There's a connection there. So if I said, how is the employment rate correlated with the real GDP? Those two things would be positively correlated with each other. All right, so we've got to pay attention to the variables we're looking at. One of the last things we hit on the videos was the types of unemployment. So we had 3 types of unemployment. What were those? Structural, frictional, and cyclical. Good. So were all of those bad? Is all unemployment bad? No. So we expect in a healthy, there's natural churning. There's industries that are emerging and there's others that are declining, right? The VCR industry is not doing so good right now, right? That industry's in decline. Find yourself unemployed because you were really good at fixing VCRs. That sucks for you, but it's probably pretty good for the economy that we've moved on to other forms of technology to watch stuff with, right? So there's always that continual churning process in a healthy, dynamic, growing economy. Some things are in decline, some things are emerging. Hopefully the emerging stuff outweighs the decline so that our trend over time, our trend of the Q over time goes like this. And by the way, we need it to go like this because what's happening to population, at least in the United States, not all countries, population is going, we're making more babies. So we need Q to go up just to keep up with the population, to maintain prosperity, to maintain a level of prosperity that we had before. So we really need this expansion of stuff going on to even really be sustainable, to think about that term. All right, so this line that I drew here is kind of the average of the ups and downs over time. So sometimes we refer to that as the trend line, and also maybe the long run potential, the potential real GDP. And so sometimes we think of, well, on average, if circumstances are right, we are getting the most out of our resources, right? We're being efficient with our resources. If we think back to the production possibilities frontier that showed the maximum combination of 2 goods an economy could produce, given its resources and technology, maybe we got burgers and fries here or something. If we were on the edge of the frontier, we were being efficient with our resources, right? We could be at point A, B, or C. All of those were equally efficient in production. And so if we're being efficient in production, hopefully this represents a long-run point of efficiency, our potential for the economy. In the short run, though, due to some circumstances we're going to talk the rest of the semester about, we may be a little beyond our potential or a little below it at any given point in time in the economy. So that'll bring up this very important discussion in macro about short run versus long run. All right, so I don't want to get too far out ahead of myself, but I wanted to tie some of the things we just did with measuring these variables we think are important. So the 3 biggies, if we had the 3 biggies that I think are important, the 3 biggies are the 3 goals of the economy. What do we want to be true with this important variable, real GDP? Growing or declining? What's our goal? For it to be going up or for it to be going down? Up, right? So that's our up arrow. So we want increasing real GDP. This is our measure of economic growth. This is the upward trend of potential GDP. So one of our goals in the economy should be to have GDP going up over time for the reasons we just talked about. Number two, what did we want with prices? What did we learn? What was the lesson to be learned about prices? Do we want inflation to be growing, stable, high, low? What are your thoughts about inflation, which is the price effect that we separated out so that we could focus on the Q? My question here is, what about the P? What's ideal for the P as a long-run objective for the economy? What would be ideal? Low. Low? And low and volatile, or low and stable? Stable, right? So low and stable inflation. Our percentage change in the price level. So low and stable prices. And then finally, we like people to be working as opposed to not working, assuming they want to work. So do we want unemployment to be high, low, zero? What's our long-run objective for unemployment? Low, not zero, because a healthy economy has unemployment. Frictional and structural unemployment are going to exist. So that's what the natural rate of unemployment was the amount of unemployment that we'd expect a healthy economy to have. So when the economy might be, and economists estimate this to be at 5 to 6%. Again, you ask different economists, you're going to get different answers. But what is that level of of unemployment that's healthy, that really reflects this growing dynamic economy, getting rid of the VCRs, getting the DVDs, the MP3s versus the 8-track tapes? You know, what level of unemployment reflects that? Generally, you'll find them in that 5 to 6% range, the natural rate of unemployment. So, in number 3, we typically are shooting for low unemployment. And ideally, probably the natural rate, where I'll use the U with the subscript N, the natural rate of unemployment. So there's our 3 main policy objectives. What can we do? Is there anything we can do, or is there a way we can set up society so that we have these 3 things going on? So these things I want you to carry forward throughout the semester as we look at different models of how the economy might set up, different policies that might be implemented. How are they doing with our scorecard? This is going to be kind of our scorecard going up as we look at maybe competing theories. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right, so this chapter focuses in on long-term growth. Long-term, so this is chapter 6. Long-term growth. And this is that trend line, right? So we're kind of thinking about potential growth for the economy. What is our long-run potential? Are there some things we can do to try to make our economy better than others? And the first thing I want to do is think about some of the data that we see from around the world. This is really what got economists interested in long-run growth. As you started looking around the world, and maybe you look at a place like Japan, you look in the United States, you look at China, and you start thinking about what's going on in those countries, and economists started saying, well, why? Why do we have the income level of real GDP per person in Latin America at $6,000 per person, converting it to dollars, whereas in the United States it's $46,000 per person? The kind of income per person. Why? Is it because they're not as smart as us? Because they got lucky and it's a roll of the dice? Is it the government? Is it the people? Is it the culture? I mean, that's a wide disparity, right? Why? So the main focus of this chapter is to try to explain to some degree, or what economists have explored over time on what causes per capita GDP to be different. So let's introduce that variable first. We're going to look at per capita real GDP. Per capita real GDP. So what's per capita mean when we think about variables that are per capita? Per person, right? So per person is per capita. So if we take our formula here, and maybe let's just say that real GDP per capita, PC, we'll put a little subscript on there, is equal to real GDP divided by the population. And of course, we can do this year by year. So maybe this was 2012 data. 2012, the population in 2012 was this. Real GDP was calculated to be this. We take that divided by the population. We got $15 trillion divided by 300 million people, 46,000 per person. Right? That's all we're doing with each country. We're just kind of thinking about per capita GDP. All right, so let's look at this around the globe for a moment. So here's some data for you. So let's just do kind of a small little chart here. This is kind of rough, the country, and this is real GDP per capita. And this was in 2009 approximately when I got this data from. So the good old US of A, we've got about $46,000 per person. Then we got places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan. They're somewhere in this, let's see, Japan's at about 32 now. Try to write a little better. Japan's at about 32. Hong Kong and Singapore are approaching the United States. They're probably closer to 46 in this time frame. So these guys, Hong Kong and Singapore, they're somewhere in this 46-ish range. Japan hasn't been doing so good the last 20 years, but they're still at 32,000 per person. Of course, we know their population's busting at the seams too. Then we've got places like big Europe, let's call it. The European countries of France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, just to kind of ramble off some European type countries that would fall roughly in a range of 32,000 also. We go to Central Europe, some of those Eastern Bloc countries that have recently kind of experienced some of the fall of communism, so the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, the Ukraine, those sorts of places, they're running around 18,000. We go to Central and South America. Central and South America, the Latin countries, our southern neighbors, they might be down in the 8 to 11,000 range. If we look at Africa, might be down in the 2,000 range. Again, it varies across Africa too. So I'm just trying to give you some general numbers here to kind of put some of the world in perspective on how much variability there is in income per person. And this is real GDP. This is the Q's. This isn't dollars. Like, oh, Russ, if you go to Africa, everything's cheap. I can get a bowl of rice for this, whereas in the United States, no, that's all been accounted for. This is the amount of actual bowls of rice per person, right? This is the Q part, per person. This is just a quick little snapshot of the globe. Now, what's more interesting is some of the changes that have taken place. So Hong Kong and Singapore are near the United States now, but just back in 1960, they were down here. In the 1960s, if we look at that data, these countries were down here. So in 40 to 50 years, Hong Kong and Singapore closed a huge gap. And the reason I say that's more interesting is because you got to ask yourself, well, can Africa and Central and South America, can they do what they did and close that gap as well? Is there what did they do that was so special to close the gap? All right, so that's what this long-term economic growth chapter is about, and we're going to develop some models to try to figure out some explanations on it. Let me pause there. I know I kind of rambled off a pretty good run. Any questions or comments so far? So Jim Gwartney was a graduate of Ottawa University. So he's one of our esteemed graduates. He was in your position back in the day. This is quite a long time ago now. I don't know when he graduated. It was probably in the 60s, I think, early 60s maybe. And he ended up getting he's the director of a fairly big program down at Florida State. I think they have 60,000 students instead of 600 or something. And then so they have a pretty big program down at Florida State. This Free the World report was some research that he did in the 1970s, and he started to look at these questions and ask how or why this is done. And so what he created was what he called a freedom index. And it's an index of how free a country is in terms of restrictions and the ability to engage in trade. And Hong Kong, as you might guess, since it was close to China, wasn't so free prior to 1960s and historically. And they changed a lot back then and they opened up to free trade, all the things that we talked about in Chapter 2 and Chapter 15, they put into place in their country. And that is one of the driving forces, according to the data, of why Hong Kong has prospered the way they have. And so each year, Jim and his cohorts put together this index, and they put every country in the world on this freedom report. All right, so this is the top 10. Now, where do you see the United States? Arab Emirates, that's not it. We're not in the top 10. We dropped out of the top 10. For the longest time, the United States was in the top 10 position, and it is not in the top 10 any longer. Here is the bottom 10 in the index. Venezuela, Myanmar, Zimbabwe, Chad. Sound like some countries where? Africa. So this is part of the correlation here on what's going on with the government and people's ability to own property, the ability to trade that property, the ability to go out and earn a buck, the ability to go out and start a business. All of that is factored into this index that he puts together for all countries around the world. And so he's picked up on some of the differences that countries have, and then there's lots of additional research that's done by economists using the data, part of the data that they report. So I think that's enough for that. I just kind of wanted to introduce some of what he had here. There's a whole PowerPoint thing. I wouldn't mind looking at some of the... Here we go. For some reason, maybe I need to go to the... me just try this. Okay, so this is a little bit more on growth. I want to get to one that's a little more. So this is the income share of the poorest 10% and economic freedom. So the income share of the poorest 10%. So the most free countries, the poor have a larger share than the least free countries. Income of the poorest 10%. So income of the poorest 10%. So often we look at income inequality of who's the poorest, who's the not. But this compares the poorest 10 in the United States versus the poorest 10 in Africa or all the other countries. But it organizes it by the most free to the less free in these quintiles, right? So if you take the long list of countries from the most free to the least free, if there's 100 countries here, 25 of them are right here represented by this yellow bar. The next 25, this yellow bar. And so the least free countries have some of the lowest incomes for the poorest people. Political rights. So ability to vote, I can't remember what all goes into this, but some sort of democracy and the rights to change things. Least free on the political rights scale. Most free to least free. Civil rights. What you can do, your civil liberties. Again, I don't remember all of what goes in there. So low scores indicate high levels of rights and individual liberties. Corruption. High scores indicate low corruption. This is all based on these freedom measures again. We've kind of detached incomes. We're looking at the level of freedom within each country. So just want to make sure that's clear. Economic freedom and life satisfaction. So we might have Switzerland, the United States, and Japan. So we have maybe even different types of cultures are all mixed in here. But according to this index, the most free countries are reporting higher life satisfaction compared to countries that are less free. Literacy, male and female. Life expectancy. All right, so anyway, that is all of that stuff is free. I just went to the website to even put this up. Questions or comments there? Okay, so I want to talk about a quick little rule of thumb when we think about growth rates. Oh, I guess there's one more data point I wanted to bring up, and that was China. So China's in the 8 to 12,000. They've been growing. They're a little bit higher now. So maybe you've heard that China's been pretty prosperous here lately, and China's been growing, partly due to relaxing, or largely due to relaxing. They are climbing the economic freedom index. They kind of look at Hong Kong and they're like, wow, what do these guys do? Maybe we should do some of that. And they are, guess how many times they are the population of Hong Kong? I don't know if you guys know world population, but you know China's got a lot of people, right? Hopefully that's somewhat common knowledge. So Hong Kong was able to do it in 50 years, and they are 200 times the amount of people. China is 200 times the amount of people. China is bigger or smaller than the United States population-wise? Bigger. How many times? 4 times. So 4 times bigger. Good. So we got a country that's 4 times bigger. You know, should we be scared? Should we be scared? We've got a country that's becoming more and more free. They've kind of figured out some of the ingredients needed to grow their economy. They're 4 times bigger than us. Are they going to stomp us out like little ants and grow into the major world power, and the United States is going to lose their long history dominance? Can we still find it advantageous to trade with China even though they get big? So could it still be a win for us even if they get big? I see some head shaking this way. I see a few this way. Why can it still be, why would you start to feel good as an undergraduate student here at Ottawa University after listening to all the media and the attention around growing China and, you know, we maybe need to protect ourselves, put on our gloves? What would be the more important thing we need to do in terms of China so that we don't lose with them? What did we learn in chapter 2? In chapter 15? Trade. No matter how big they are, as long as they're different from us, if we keep healthy trade relations with them, if we trade and keep open with them, as China grows, what happens to the United States growth? It grows too. It's a win-win situation, right? That's the win-win part of trade. So even as China grows, now how fast they grow relative to us, to me, as long as we're both growing, that sounds like a good thing. So I try to have people who are afraid of the growth of China to not be President Obama, George Bush. It doesn't matter what party you're with. They are generally attempting to keep good negotiations and good talks open with China, and that's part of the reason why. It's a win-win situation, not only for us in China, but for the world. If we start utilizing China's resources better, their huge population, their vast lands, their cities, their infrastructure, their factories, if we start utilizing their stuff better, the whole world wins. There's potential there for the whole world to win, so that they not only bring up their income levels over here, but all of the rest of the income levels for other people who are participating in it go up as well. Okay, we got to do the rule of 70. Some of you mathematical people might have heard that. It's also the rule of 72, but this textbook keeps it, I think, a little bit easier, calling it the rule of 70. Has anybody heard of the rule of 70? I won't even pick on you, but you heard, ring a bell for you? Okay, that's right. In personal finance, we talked about it too. This is just kind of a common rule that we can use to do what? What does it help us do? How long it'll take something to double. So when we look at that chart over there and we say, oh, Central Europe's at 18,000, how long would it take them to double? Well, the answer to that depends on what's going on with their growth rate, the rate of change each year of their income. All right, so the rule of 70 is to say this: the number of times it takes something to double. And I'm going to leave this one real generic at first. We can get into the number of years, the number of months, the number of seconds. It doesn't really matter. So the number of times it takes something to double is approximately equal to 70 divided by its rate of growth. $70 divided by its rate of growth. So, for example, if a give me a good, any good, first thing that comes to mind?
Donuts.
Donuts. If a box of donuts is, what are they running at Daylight Donuts down the road for a box? You know, big, nice 12-pack. What are those running? $6 maybe or so? 5 or 6. Let's call it $6. Is $6, and inflation is 10%. How long will it take? How long will it take for the price to double to $12? Answer? Seven months, 7 years, 7 decades. 7 years. Why? Why would it be years? Yes, that's right. Because if, I guess I didn't maybe explicitly say it here, but the inflation rate was expressed in annual terms. Right? So if this is an annual rate, if this was a monthly rate of inflation, then it's only going to take 7 months. But if this is the annual rate of inflation, then it's going to take 7 years. So answer 7 years, assuming an annual rate of 10%. Okay, so I wanted to pick on the price right out of the gate so that you know this is this can be applied to just about anything that we have a rate of change to. So if we have a tree that is currently 5 feet in height, and we know that it's growing by 3% a year, how long will it take for the tree to double in size to 10 feet? 70 divided by 3, it'll take 20-some years. Okay, so you can apply this rule of 70 to anything. It is a rule of thumb. It's an approximation. So if you really put some hard mathematics to it, it's not going to be perfect, but it's a very nice, quick, and easy way to think about growth rates. Or also it can be helpful with interest rates and that sort of thing too. But for our purposes now, let me give you a little bit more complicated example. If the USA grows at let's do 1%, and China grows at 10%, which is what the Chinese growth rate's been here recently. How long will it take? How long will it take for China to catch up to the United States in terms of real GDP per capita? So let's say the USA is at 46,000. Real GDP per capita in the United States is 46,000, the same number I put up before. And let's put per capita GDP in China at 12,000. Pull out your calculators, turn to your neighbor, and start trying to crank some of those numbers out. Is everybody clear on what we're doing? So today, the US is at 46,000, China's at 12,000, and we're wondering about the day when they become Hong Kong, what we saw up there. At what point will they catch up to us in terms of income per person, given these growth rates? The numbers don't come out clean and easy, so you have to do some approximation, a little bit of creative thinking, but you got kind of the gist of it, hopefully, with the doubling, using the rule of 70. Yeah, so using the rule of 70. I'll come around if you guys got some questions you can ask. Yeah, lay it out on your calculator. Just keep laying it out. They're at 42,000 right now. Or 46, sorry. Yep. So they'll start doubling. Think about how long it'll take them to double their 46. Think about the same thing for China. They're at 12. How long is it going to take them to double to 24? Okay, so what does China have in 7 years? 24. What do they have in 14 years?
48.
Okay, so you keep doubling. That's one of the parts of this that we're going to keep doubling it up. And then the United States is going to take a little while. We've got to figure out where they meet in the middle.
China will have
After the 15th year, okay? Why don't you guys work on that? And we'll pick up there on Friday and see how you